This is the Heroes for Freedom podcast. I'm Rick Robinson. Abandoned to fight the deadly German Luftwaffe alone. Immediately, right away, James knew this was going to be up to him. Piloting his supercharged P-51 Mustang fighter, his eyes narrowed on the massive incoming German Luftwaffe airplanes, or warplanes actually, more than 30 strong. They all had orders to shoot down these slow, lumbering American B-17s, those who were in James's care at that moment. These B-17 crews of young American airmen grit their teeth, seeing the swarms of enemy and doubting that they would make it home alive that day. But in fact, they would have a front row seat on one of the most incredible dogfighting exhibitions in history. Quietly, some believed what happened that day in the sky was a miracle. Their own angel on their shoulders moment, guided by a loving God who had not forgotten them. In this case, heaven could not have picked a better angel, though a destroying angel to be sure. But first, my friends, I want to ask you for your help to stay in the fight by subscribing. Your support and encouragement are priceless. They're priceless to me. Our children and grandchildren have never been in greater danger right now. They are in need, for they are, in C.S. Lewis's warning words, being born into enemy-occupied territory. Again, I thank you for your support. So, who was this lone American stick jockey, this fighter pilot who, like the cavalry of the Old West, rode to the rescue that fateful day? His name was Major James Howard, but James was not born in America. No, he was born in China. His parents were there doing humanitarian work in Canton, or Guangzhou. He spent his first 14 years running with his Chinese friends in this adventure-filled streets of this city. When Japan invaded China in 1937, James was back in the States, so he enlisted in the Naval Air Station in Pensacola. He took to the air like a bird, earning his wings in 1939 and assigned to the aircraft carrier USS Enterprise, which was based in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. But he would not be there during the Japanese attack at Pearl Harbor. This was the summer of 1941, about 6 months before Pearl Harbor. And James saw these atrocities that Japan was inflicting on his Chinese friends, and he heard about them. So he joined the American volunteer group, known as the Flying Tigers, determined to help the outmanned and outgunned Chinese Air Force. Flying from bases in Burma, these were British-controlled areas, Lieutenant Howard flew an incredible 56 missions, flying a P-40 Warhawk, shooting down an unheard-of 7 Japanese warplanes. Meanwhile, the Japanese army continued to gobble up Chinese land and resources. In the city of Nanking, Japanese forces lined up and beheaded hundreds of thousands of men, women, and children. These butchers would often have to put down their samurai swords to take a break, they'd say, complaining that their arms had gotten too tired. This was called the Rape of Nanking in history. 369,000 Chinese were murdered. In order to break down Chinese society, 80,000 women and girls were separated out, abused unspeakably, and then executed without mercy in front of their fathers and husbands. With Japan controlling much of China, the war, however, was about to widen dramatically, for Japan had a secret plan to attack the American naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. After that successful surprise attack, which nearly wiped out America's naval presence in the Pacific, by the way, the American Flying Tigers were disbanded in China, and these crack American pilots were brought home. They needed to be home, and they were greatly needed. He was promoted to captain, and so James was one of only a handful of American aces that even existed at the time. Soon, promoted to the rank of major, he was given command of the 356th Fighter Squadron based in England. He flew many missions, but on January 11, 1944, Major Howard, leading his squadron of newly arriving P-51B Mustangs, flying cover for the 384th Bomber Group of B-17s, they ran into the attacking wave of 30 German Luftwaffe Messerschmitt Me-109s, among other planes, as I mentioned above. And this is the rest of the story. And these corps were sent to swarm and destroy these lumbering American bombers that were being protected by Major Howard's squadron. The battle began in the high clouds, where Major Howard's squadron of P-51s got scattered, and many of them were temporarily lost in the thick soup. Suddenly, Suddenly, Major Howard found himself alone, facing the entire German Air Force. It seemed like the entire German Air Force. Major Howard knew he could not wait for his men to return and regroup. The battle was on. Facing such a large enemy force, the B-17s he knew would be quickly annihilated. So Major Howard went on the attack solo. Dozens of German fighters swarmed Major Howard, trying to get at these vulnerable American bombers. For half an hour, fighting alone, James dove at the enemy planes, shooting down at least 6 of the enemy until he ran out of ammunition. Then he buzzed the remaining enemy planes, threatening to ram them, trying to distract the pilots and to get them to back off. The leader of the American bomber formation reported later, quote, "For sheer determination and guts, it was the greatest exhibition I've ever seen. It was a case of one lone American against what seemed the entire Luftwaffe, the German Air Force. He was all over the wing, across and around us, protecting us. They can't give that boy a big enough medal," unquote. The grateful bomber crews, after their safe return to their base in England, wanted to learn the identity of this amazing lone angel on their shoulders. It wasn't until later that they found out his identity. Later, the mission, the Army Air Corps, after this mission, they held a news conference for the American and British press. Popular Science afterwards wrote, this is their headline, about this battle. "Fighting at 425 miles per hour" was the title. A young reporter for the Stars and Stripes, you may recognize his name, Andy Rooney, ended up on 60 Minutes many years later, called this event, quote, "the greatest fighter pilot story of World War II." Another World War II pilot called Major Howard's dogfight truly unique. He said, quote, an attack by a single fighter on 4 or 5 times his own number wasn't uncommon, but a deliberate attack by a single fighter against 30-plus enemy fighters without tactical advantage of height or surprise is rare almost to the point of extinction," unquote. Later that year, in June of 1944, Major James Howard was awarded the Medal of Honor. At the time, he was coordinating fighter coverage for the massive Allied invasion of D-Day at Normandy. After the war, James published his excellent book titled Roar of the Tiger, and it's a good one, telling of his many wartime adventures. Later, he became the director of aeronautics for St. Louis City. His last public appearance was on January 27, 1995, the guest of honor at a banquet hosted by the West Central Florida Council of the Boy Scouts of America. He died 6 weeks later in the Bay Pines Veterans Hospital. He is buried in Arlington National Cemetery. Major James H. Howard understood, as many Americans, I think, who've lived a part of their lives abroad, like myself, that the United States of America is truly exceptional. James would not allow a powerful dictatorship to brutalize its weak and innocent neighbor. He stood up and put his own life on the line. He didn't send others. He sent himself. The spirit of volunteerism, merely one American character trait, saving our globe from tyranny, and has saved it many, many times in history. Once this historical fact was taught in our schools proudly and in the schools of liberated peoples of Europe and Asia. 30 years ago, I witnessed it being taught to the children of Kuwait and Jordan, Saudi Arabia, during and after the Gulf War, when I was assisting the Gulf War Task Force, as they were threatened at that time by a tyrant. But since then, America's true history is being rewritten or sent down the memory hole for incineration, from George Orwell's 1984, of course. Not only within the United States, but abroad, the global media, much like the media in America, marches now to a toxic ideology, one that is determined to rewrite history and erase the positive influence of the United States. Why does this matter? Well, it matters a lot. Because nothing right now, I believe, is doing greater damage to global peace and stability than these misguided proponents of anti-Americanism issuing from within our own country. Such lends fuel and motivation to the schemes of the world's tyrants, to drug cartels, organized crime, terrorists, and human traffickers. This, my friends, is not optional. We must continue to tell these inspiring stories of America's noble and great ones, to laud our American ensign to the nations, this shining city on a hill to individual liberty, which Washington, Lincoln, Reagan, and other great American leaders have promoted with a passion. That, I believe, is now every American's responsibility, each one of us, to pick up that gauntlet, to pick it up before it's too late. Thank you for your time. I'm Rick Robison, and this is the Heroes for Freedom podcast.